Okay, good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening to all of you friends, wherever you may be. My name is Dinesh Suna. I'm the coordinator of the Ecumenical Water Network of World Council of Churches, based here in Geneva. And on behalf of my co-organizers, whom I would name a little later, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you to today's webinar focusing on menstrual hygiene. In addition to the responsibility that I have in the WCC, I'm also one of the co-leads of PARD, which is a Partnership of Religion in Development. And along with my colleague, Reverend Nikki Ashwood, the Program Executive for the Women's Concerns in WCC, and also with the Norwegian Church Aid, we want to extend a warm welcome to all of you. And as I mentioned, PARD is also one of the co-organizers. So friends, 28th of May, we observed the World Menstrual Hygiene Day, and it was a Saturday, and therefore we are today observing this very crucial and important day in the lives of many around the world through this webinar. We know, friends, that today millions of women and girls around the world are stigmatized or excluded and discriminated against simply because they menstruate, just a simple bodily function. And friends, that is actually preventing the women and girls from getting an education or earning an income or fully and equally participating in the everyday life with dignity. And due to the societal and religious taboo that is around this issue of menstruation, along with that, the lack of access to clean water, sanitation, and sanitary hygiene products, the whole problem of menstrual hygiene is all the more becoming problematic. And that is why we are trying to look at it from a gender perspective, from religious perspective, and from the perspective of water and sanitation. And the objective of this webinar, as we know, is to create awareness around this important issue that is seldom talked by the faith-based groups, including our churches. And so that through this webinar, we can make an attempt to break the taboo around it, create awareness on this very important issue, and hopefully by 2030, through these small little initiatives, no one would be discriminated or held back just because they menstruate, and which is a very normal physiological and bodily function. So with these few words of introduction, I would now invite my colleague and the co-organizer, Reverend Nikki Ashwood. Over to you, Nikki, for a few introductory remarks.
Thank you so very much, Dinesh. It is a pleasure to be here and co-organizing with you. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and perhaps even good night, depending on where you are in the world. As a female, the issue of stigma and shame has been a very real part of my teenage and adult years in relation to menstruation. I recall friends who were unable to speak about having their period, perhaps for fear that the word itself would turn against them. Yet, in a culture where violence against women is often rampant, Jamaica, some of the most potent and degrading insults and words used to insult others were affiliated with a woman's period and or the hygiene products they use. While my home church does not use menstruation as a grounds for exclusion of women, they, like many other churches, do not encourage conversations in the public arena around menstruation because it is considered that this should be private or probably not even spoken about. It's taboo. Unfortunately, privacy for many can spell danger for women and girls who have their periods. Lack of understanding can result in shame, trauma, rape, discrimination, poor health, and can even negatively impact food security. Unfortunately, both faith and culture are still being named as primary culprits in engendering shame and stigma associated with menstruation and menstrual health. As people of faith, it is imperative that we revisit these whispered conversations, rewrite the narratives, transform the faith practices and social norms, cultures, and lives today for a healthier and safe tomorrow. Here at the World Council of Churches and through the Just Community of Women and Men, we seek to invite you to join with us as we break the silence, open the space for candid, real conversation, raise awareness, and even critique our well-loved and most revered faith traditions. I join with Dinesh in welcoming each of you. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, Nikki, for setting the tone for this very important webinar. Friends, we have, within this 90 minutes, we have 10 speakers. So therefore, it's quite going to be a very challenging time to keep to time, first of all, but very interesting, various perspectives that we want to get. One first part, we would focus on the problems and the solutions that's offered locally and nationally, internationally. But the second aspect, we would get to see the religious perspective, how it is supporting or promoting or becoming a hindrance to menstrual hygiene. So very quickly, I want to acknowledge those who are present here. I would request Walter to kindly spotlight our colleagues who are here, along with Nikki and myself. We would have Martin. Yes, Martin also would be joining us from Uganda. Hello, Martin. We would have Roxana. Hello. Roxana from Cuba, another young theologian. Hi, Roxana. We would have Anita from Kasa, India, to tell us something on the ground, what they are doing on this issue. And then we have to listen to a young voice, Lucy from Kenya. Hi, Lucy. Then we have Shahin Ashraf from Islamic Relief Worldwide, and also a part co-lead joining us from UK. Yes, so these are the people that are present in person, and then we have several who couldn't make it. They have sent their videos to us. So friends, without further ado, first we would now go to listen to the keynote address from the World Council of Churches leadership, the Deputy General Secretary of World Council of Churches, Professor Dr. Isabel Apao-Firi, who is a Malawian teacher and a theologian. And as I mentioned, she's the Deputy General Secretary of the WCC, and she's responsible for the public witness and diaconia, and our program of Ecumenical Water Network are on Just Community of Women and Men. All these fall under her leadership. And interestingly, she has been regarded as the mother of the Circle of Concerned African Theologians from Malawi. So over to you, Walter. Kindly play the pre-recorded message of Dr. Isabel, who is attending the WCC Executive Committee meeting today and couldn't be here in person.
On behalf of the staff leadership of the World Council of Churches, I would like to extend my heartfelt welcome to one and all to this webinar on making menstruation a normal fact of life by 2030. Menstruation is a natural fact of life. Globally, about 3.5 billion women and girls have monthly periods. Yet, in many cultures and religions globally, menstruation is often shrouded in secrecy, thus creating space for stigma and abuse. Many women and girls are obliged to abstain from religious and social activities during their menstrual flow. Others lack access to hygienic products and are forced to use makeshift products, which often do far more harm than good. Foundational and fundamental religious practices sometimes use the fact of women's menstruation to prohibit women from participating in some activities, and may even justify and banish women to unsafe spaces during their menstruation cycles. The Hebrew scriptures, which form the basis for both Judaism and Christianity, states that a woman is ritually impure for 7 days. While Rachel used this to her advantage when she stole her father's idols, as recorded in Genesis 31 verses 34 to 35, one realizes that in our current context, it is far more likely that the women would be disadvantaged. It is inconceivable that anyone would believe that this should augur well for our times. And yet, there are still religious groups today that justify exclusion and discrimination against women on the grounds of the Holy Scriptures. I'll give 2 examples. In 1986, I attended a Sunday service in Accra, Ghana, at a church founded by a woman. I was very excited to go to this church simply because the founder was a woman. When the service started, I noticed that there were only men in front. I was horrified to learn that the founder of the church was joining the service from outside because she was menstruating. According to the rules of this church, menstruating women are not allowed to enter into the church. Indeed, we saw a large group of menstruating women joining the service from outside. The second example is from my PhD studies, which was on the participation of women in church leadership in the Ngoma Synod of the Church of Central Africa Presbyterian in Malawi. During field research in 1991 and in 1992, I discovered that one of the reasons used to deny ordination of women in this church is because women menstruate. This exclusion from attendance at church service to no ordination of women because of menstruation does not make theological sense when one considers that menstruation is a sign of hope for women's capacity to be co-creators with God. Menstruation is a sign of hope for continuation of humanity, something to be cherished and not to be used as a reason for the exclusion of women and girls. Menstruation is more than just a religious taboo. There are also socio-economic and cultural implications. When one considers the cultures that also support exclusion of menstruating women and girls from public spaces, both schoolgirls and teachers are at a disadvantage if they are to absent themselves for days at a time every month. Using a 5-day absenteeism concept based on the stipulation in the Hebrew text, one realizes that women are forced to be absent for approximately 45 out of 180 school days each year. That amounts to 25% of their school days lost, resulting in grave educational setbacks, especially where there is limited access to hygienic products that would facilitate school attendance for girls during their period. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals number 4 insist on inclusive and equitable quality education, and the promotion of lifelong learning for all. When schoolgirls and even teachers are obliged to be absent from teaching learning spaces due to a natural aspect of their lives, how is this equitable? Removing the stigma would in turn create more opportunities for quality education. Of course, we recognize that the exclusion from social and educational spaces sometimes stems from limited or no access to water, sanitation facilities, or proper sanitary items. This is yet another breach in the earmarks of sustainability and development. Where there is a scarcity of sanitation services, including safe and effective products, menstruating women's health is at risk. It is estimated that around 3.6 billion people are denied access to safe sanitation, and this proved to be dangerous during the onset of COVID-19 pandemic. In many instances, menstruating women and girls are forced to use sanitary products during their periods for a prolonged time, and this may result in reproductive and urinary tract infections, among other harmful outcomes. Period poverty, that is, the lack of access to menstrual and sanitary supplies, menstrual hygiene education, and waste management, is a serious challenge in many small island and developing countries. Where period poverty is on the rise, there is the proportionate likelihood that women and girls use whatever materials they have at hand to build makeshift products, or worse, they are banished to uncomfortable spaces until their periods are over. We recall that in some communities, this was still a common practice not until long ago. The banished women shared spaces with local pets or farm animals, or to a menstruation hut, resulting in other accidents, diseases, or even death. As people of faith, we have to practice what we preach. If we believe in equality and dignity for all, then there is need for our becoming involved in advocacy to make menstrual health and hygiene normalized in our communities. We need to transform our theology about menstruation so that we promote a theology that affirms abundant life for all. It will be shown in our conversations today that this is everyone's business, including that of the religious institutions, and thus it should not be the source of stigma, exclusion, or stereotyping. The time to stop this is now. We must be the ones to effect change. You and us at the World Council of Churches, our partners and member churches, together working to be the difference for over 500 million women and girls who experience period poverty. In a world where menstrual hygiene is not available to all, the rights, dignity, and worth of women are also being denied. We call on each of you in this webinar and the wider networks to join us in making menstruation a normal fact of life. I wish all the speakers and participants a productive discussion on this important but seldom talked about issue. I thank you.
Okay, so that was Professor Dr. Isabella Paufiri, the Deputy General Secretary of the WCC, and she highlighted the societal, religious taboos and how the church also is grappling with this issue. 500 million women experiencing period poverty is quite shocking indeed. To continue the discussion, we would now move on to the next speaker. But before that, I also want to remind you that you please write down your questions or comments in the chat section so that we will have some opportunity for discussion as we move along. So the next speaker is from the Norwegian Church Aid, and that is Lisa Sivertsen. She is the Director of the Communication and Politics in Norwegian Church Aid. She has more than 20 years of experience from organizations like Amnesty International, Care International, etc., taking several different roles within the fields of communication and political advocacy, and NCA is deeply engaged in addressing the issue of menstrual hygiene. So she has sent us a video message. So over to you, Walter.
Dear all, thank you for this opportunity to be here today with you on this important event to mark the International Day for Menstrual Hygiene. My name is Lisa Sivertsen, and I work as the Director of Politics and Communication in Norwegian Church Aid. Norwegian Church Aid, or NCA, have worked on water, sanitation and hygiene for 75 years. Actually, providing water to refugees was our very first operation in Germany after the World War II. And even though we surely did provide life-saving water, hygiene and sanitation services in 1947, I have to admit that it took many years before NCA started to openly focus on menstrual hygiene. Not because women and girls did not have these needs, of course, but because the need for such services were not discussed openly or reported widely in the humanitarian and development world until fairly recently. I am also very convinced that engaged humanitarians and development workers to some extent did their very best to respond to the needs, but the needs and the efforts were kept largely invisible in project proposals, results frameworks. It was a taboo and donors did not prioritize it. I am very relieved and happy that the situation is different today. More and more attention is now given to menstrual hygiene in humanitarian and development work. But as you also know very well, millions of girls and women still lack full services to have a menstruation in a dignified and safe manner. First of all, menstrual hygiene is all about access. Women and girls need to have access to sanitary products, a private place to change and wash, and information about menstrual health and hygiene in order to manage their period in a safe and dignified manner. In emergencies, we know that lack of access to sanitary products may prevent women and girls from getting crucial aid as they are unable to move around freely. Lack of access to water and essential supplies during menstruation can also increase the risk of infections and negative health consequences. Secondly, menstrual hygiene is all about human rights. Cultural stigmas and taboos about menstruation, as well as lack of access to information, toilets, clean water and sanitary products do prevent women and girls from attending school, work, accessing healthcare, and taking full part in their own communities. Isolation during menstruation can increase the risk of violence and abuse. Women and girls and all humans who are menstruating should have access to health services required in relation to the menstrual cycle, such as diagnosis, treatment, and care for menstrual cycle-related discomforts and disorders, including access to appropriate health services and resources, pain relief, and strategies for self-care. The third and last point I want to make today is that menstrual hygiene needs to be prioritized. Today, the majority of the leaders in the world are men, and the resources are also largely owned and dominated by men. And many do not talk openly about menstruation. We know that millions of women and girls worldwide lack access to adequate information and sanitary products and facilities to manage their period. And we also know, unfortunately, that menstrual health and hygiene is still often overlooked in humanitarian emergencies. And we know too many girls drop out of school when they have their first period. Everyone should be able to speak openly about menstruation, and the needs of millions of women and girls must be addressed and prioritized to uphold human dignity and basic human rights. Through our organizations and partners and networks of all of us here today, we are able to reach many leaders, political leaders, traditional leaders, faith-based leaders, and others. Norwegian Church Aid is currently mobilizing faith leaders in many countries to speak up about menstrual hygiene and dignity. And my message to all of you here today is that we need all of you on board in this work. Use your influence. Let us together work to ensure that all women and girls are able to manage their menstruation in a healthy, safe manner and with dignity. No girl should ever have to drop out of school or face violence because of her menstruation. No one should feel ashamed of their period. Let us together build a world by 2030 where no one is discriminated or held back because they menstruate. Thank you so much.
Thanks to Lisa in absentia. She is not physically present here today, but that was a very powerful message. And as she mentioned towards the end, they have started a campaign in Norwegian Church Aid where religious leaders are coming forward to talk about it openly, to include the discussion of period in a dignified manner, because it is a simple fact of life. So a 1-minute video, I would request our communication colleagues to kindly play that. Various religious leaders have come forward to talk about it. Yes, so that was the video, and we are openly inviting all of you to kindly speak out, and then we would encourage Norwegian Church Aid particularly has requested us that you are most welcome to hold this placard period with dignity and take photographs, share in social media, and break the taboo. So friends, to move on, today's speakers are predominantly women because this is an issue that mostly affects women, but without the men's cooperation and participation, this would be incomplete. And that is why also we have among in our midst, we have Martin Sabiti from Uganda, who is a male gender champion from the Anglican Church of Uganda. He sits in the African Male Champion Coordination Committee and also coordinate the Male Gender Champions activities in Uganda. So over to you, Martin, in about 4 to 5 minutes, share with us what you do.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dinesh, for the opportunity. I greet you all participants of this webinar. And I'm glad for being accorded this opportunity to speak about my work as a male gender champion in Uganda. As a coordinator, as a male champion, as someone who is spearheading gender justice in the Anglican Church in Uganda, I have opportunity to do quite a number of things, to engage men, to care about the issues of women, which women are raising over time. And so as part of the things that I'm doing as a champion is to involve myself in the menstrual issue. And I got involved in trying to bring out the idea of reusable pads for girls and women. This is because there's a lot of need for pads in Uganda. Many of our young girls go to school. They don't have pads, and some have dropped out of school. Some feel ashamed. There's a lot of stigma. And so it is important for us to get involved, especially as men. And so I am trying to amplify the voice of men in this cause and challenging all men and inspiring them to get involved in these issues and stop the stigma. But most importantly, I was involved in a project to physically train young girls and old women on how to make reusable pads using local or easily accessible materials, because pads can be quite expensive for many people. So now I stay in the capital of Uganda, which is in Kampala, and there is a big slum. I stay at the tip of it, and so I see a lot of girls there. They are living in very deplorable conditions, and so I imagine that even accessing pads was a bit difficult. So we set out to try and do something, train them on how to use local things they can have, all things they can access, pieces of cloth to be able to make reusable pads that are not very, very expensive. And so I partnered with quite a number of people, and especially the church, my local church, where my wife is a staff, is a clergy, a member. And so we work together, we work with the local government, worked with an organization, a local organization that works with the slum, with the youth in the slum. And we are able to put up a training of young girls and women. And over 210 young girls were trained on how to make reusable pads. And over 67 women were also trained. So now we have been monitoring some of them. They are able to make pads. They are able to train others. And so what we do, we identify those that lack materials. We provide using the little money that we can mobilize locally. We approach people. We partner with organizations that we see are passionate about helping young girls to be able to access pads. But we emphasize for sustainability purposes that we do not purchase, but we train so that they can be able to make for themselves. We're also involved in advocacy and sensitization, especially to fight the stigma. We're engaging men in churches, in their fellowships, in their unions, so that we sensitize them, because some of these things begin at home. If parents sensitize their boys on how to treat girls who are facing menstruation, then that stigma can be fought and the girls can be comfortable. We are trying to advocate for safe places, safe spaces where girls can be able to feel comfortable. I'm also particularly involved in resource mobilization for our team to ensure that we raise more resources, to do more trainings. We're focusing also on trainings, that when we have many young girls, many women out there trained, they know what to do, they know the materials to use and how they can find them cheaply, they're able to make for their children. But we also do not shy away from reaching out to organizations that can be able to directly donate pads to schools, school-going children in big numbers. So we are involved in all that as a way of promoting advocacy for menstrual hygiene and understanding that this is not really something to put down our girls and
Thank
women.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I'm sorry to rush you, but we have a big line of speakers. But it's
right.
great to see an initiative taken by men, and I'm sure there will be many questions because it is a sensitive topic surrounded with secrecy and how men are addressing this issue. Friends, you have questions, comments, please write them in the chat section. And then we move to now Latin America and Caribbean region, where we would have our next speaker, a young theologian, that is Roxana Gonzalez. She holds a degree in theology from the seminary in Matanzas. Currently, she coordinates the Sancti Spiritus province of the Cuban Council of Churches and collaborates with the Presbyterian Church in Cuba. So Roxana, tell us your experience and what do you want to share with us? 4 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, I took out the microphone. Sorry, connections in Cuba are not really good, and we have some troubles with that. So, briefly, what I was saying is that it's very important to handle this theme about menstrual hygiene. There are so many factors, different factors that we should talk about. One of them is gender equality. Not because we are on our period, we should be separated, excluded from our daily activities. Thanks God, our system in Cuba are very inclusive. Girls and women should go to school, should go to work. They are not excluded from their daily activities or sports. The second point, it's about education. Our educational system in Cuba have designed on one of their programs on the biology course to teach sexual education, menstrual hygiene, to talk about the changes of our bodies as teenagers and how we must take care of them as part of being healthy. And this is important fact because it helps us to prepare for the future and for a new changes that are coming. And I think it's very important. And in the third point, it's about our health in Cuba. We have a free health system in Cuba. So every girl and woman receive 10 sanitary pads each month at a very low cost. It's really good, but sometimes it's problematic for us because it's not enough. And it's really, really, really hard to find them. And over this time, over the pandemic situation, over some challenges, economic and political challenges we have, we are struggling so much. There are so many needs, and obviously it's so more difficult for women to satisfy and to find their needs to keep a correct menstrual hygienic. I remember I'm gonna tell one of my experience when I was a teenager at school. I didn't have the resources at school. I couldn't keep a correct menstrual hygiene at school. The bathroom didn't have water. The sanitary pads wasn't good quality, and I ended up staining my skirt. So I had to call my parents and I had to go home to take a shower and to go back to school. So this is one of the huge problematic that we are facing right now in Cuba. We don't have the supplies, the sanitary supplies. We don't have the enough sanitary resources, girls and women at school. So for me, it was so frustrating. I was so embarrassing for what happened. And now that I grew up, I understand that was not to feel embarrassed. It happened to every girl, but what we should do is to progress on our sanitary needs. And it's a right for girls and women to have access to services at school to manage their menstrual hygiene. Mostly what we are doing as at church is to have talks with girls, mostly then teenagers at churches. So we provide them some education and to help them how to take care of their body. That's what we mostly can do. That's what is in our hands. And this is a very important topic that we should always talking about, and more for those taboos that are happening today. Not to feel ashamed for the normal part of life that we have. It's part of a dignity. Thank you so much, and this is some of our Cuban perspective and experience that we are living and facing today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Roxana. I'm glad that towards the end, the connection problems sorted out and we heard you very clearly. Of course, this was very encouraging to see that in Cuba, you have a government at least who provides this free sanitary products, even though not adequate enough, but that is also not a reality to many. And thank you also for sharing your personal story growing up as a child. I'm sure there will be some questions, comments coming up, and Nikki, my colleague, would be collecting these questions. So please let those questions, comments keep coming up. Thank you very much. We move on to another dimension of how do we include menstrual hygiene while addressing the issue of humanitarian aid. And to speak to that, I have Anita Kukriti, who is actually my former colleague in CASA, Churches Auxiliary for Social Action in India, when I used to work for CASA. Anita is the project officer, and she has more than 20 years worked with this organization around the issue of sustainable development, local self-governance, gender, institutional development, humanitarian aid, etc. So over to you, Anita. I believe you have a PowerPoint presentation, and Walter would help us with that. 4 to 5 minutes to you. Thank you.
I will not take more than 5 minutes in expressing what we are doing in CASA. Yeah, I will start. Yes, Walter, next slide. Yeah, I will start with the Indian context. And we have seen that more than 77% of girls and women in India, they use old cloth, which is often reused. They use newspapers, dried leaves, and husk sand during periods. Menstruation, as said by everybody, it is being considered as a taboo and then in society. And they have been asked to stay away from male members of the family and stay in isolation. Most of the time, mothers are very reluctant to talk about this topic with their daughters. And the reason is that they don't have that technical knowledge or scientific knowledge on puberty and menstruation, especially in rural areas which are adjected by poverty, lack of education, and no access to basic amenities like sanitary pads and basic healthcare to curb the social and physical effects of menstruation. And most of the time, the girls and women are supposed to stay in separate room. They're not allowed to enter in kitchen and temple. I think it's a global phenomena nowadays. And of course, there are most vulnerable sections like transgender men, non-binary individuals, and also people who are disabled. So they have their own challenges when we talk about menstrual practices. In COVID times, we have seen that girls and women, they were trapped inside the home with little access to sanitary pads and means to afford them. During emergency, we have also seen that because there is no separate toilet facilities, so it was very challenging to you know to address the issue of menstrual waste, especially when the girls and women are staying in relief camps or temporary shelters. Changing pad is a challenge in temporary shelter during emergencies. So these are some of the experiences we see in the context. And in the next few slides, I will just take you what we are going to do in the humanitarian program, as well as in the long-term development plans. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, these are some of the girls. They are making reusable pads. This initiative we have started. So maybe I will talk about it later. Yeah, next slide, please. In terms of during emergency situation, we provide distribution of sanitary pads for the most affected during emergency interventions. And we deal with every type of emergency, whether it is flood or landslides or cloud burst or earthquakes. So there is a hygiene kit. So we provide the sanitary pads as well as some other support material like soaps and underwear. In the photographs, you can see the photo of dignity kit. We call it dignity kit. And there are things like cotton roll, soap bar holder, antiseptic liquid, washing powder, things like that. In the COVID times, there is a distribution of sanitary pads for those who are affected, for the women and the girls in all the states cutting across the country. Yeah, next slide, please. We also have long-term development program all over the country. So the first step which we have taken is that we are trying to create awareness around social taboos and stigmas which are related to menstruation. And we talk it with not only with the women, but also with the men. The second important step which we have taken is that we have started eco-friendly reusable sanitary pad production and their entrepreneurial skills in the state of Maharashtra and Rajasthan, so that they can start making or manufacturing these pads on their own. We are also into trainings on health and hygiene on regular basis. And we are also come up with the idea of making a WhatsApp group of public health workers like ANM midwife, so that women and adolescent girls, they can easily talk to them in case they need any support, some support in terms of sanitary pads or anything. So that can be done. Next slide, please. These are some of the pictures of the sanitary pad making groups. This is the initiative of Maharashtra, where they are being taught to make pads on their own. Next slide. Yeah. In terms of future, we see roadmap as that, and this has come up as some of the learnings in front of us. First is that we need to address the issue of menstrual awareness as a fixed segment of the gender justice work, which we undertake in the gender components of all the projects in CASA. Second thing is that we need to expand our work with the LGBTQIA+, because this is the group which is most vulnerable, and many of the organizations are not working with them directly. And it's very important to address this issue, especially beyond the binary of men and women. We need to strengthen the perspectives of community through access to information, facilities, and motivation. And then we have to build critical thinking around myths and taboos. Because as we have heard about so many other participants, that it's a global phenomena that people, they have their taboos and myths and beliefs around menstruation. Then we need to scale this initiatives with the help of government, where policies and resource mobilization can be ensured. We are also looking for innovation and new partnership so that more focused work can be worked. with us. And then the one important challenge is that we need to see how menstrual waste can be managed. So that is one challenge we have seen in the long-term development as well as in the emergency situation. Yeah, this is from my side. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anita, for showing us what can be done practically on the ground. And as a humanitarian aid organization, you have really inspired many who are attending the webinar. I think there'll be questions. You already addressed a question on the waste management around menstruation. There was a question, and I'm sure there'll be many more about the receptibility of these interventions you did from the community itself. So friends, interest of time, move on to the next. And this is where we want to hear another young voice, a young woman who wants to share the experience of how to mobilize young people from informal settlements, how they are facing the challenges around menstrual hygiene and what they are doing. So we have Lucy to speak to us, the founder, executive director of Positive Young Women Voices, a community-based organization in the informal settlement of Dandora, Nairobi. So over to you, Lucy. Please go ahead and share with us in about 4 to 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of you joining and for the wonderful remarks from my fellow speakers. So on Friday, Positive Young Women Voices had a Twitter space chat, and our discussion was an interesting one. Menstruating people coming together to discuss our first time. What was prominent was that first period came with shame. This was because menstruation was not something that is spoken openly about. It was also because most did not have proper information on menstruation, that on what one needs to do, what having a period meant, and why one was even having a period. What was being said by friends and relatives was not appealing, and this was a conversation most had not had at home. It was not even implied that when you start your period, you should go to your mother to ask for pads or an adult in the home. I, for one, when I started my period, I knew this would be used to shame me in front of all and sundry, especially my mother's friends. It would probably be coming from a point of trying to show how grown I was, but I would not suffer from this. So when I was sent for groceries, I would try to get some leftovers over monies throughout the month for a pack of pads, which was about 50 cents to $1. I would have many accidents as I tried not to carry pads to school, as I did not know how to have the conversation with anyone, even with my best friend. I would soil my dress and bear the shame as I tried to stretch the pack of pads to last 5 days and without anyone knowing that I was on my period. We now work towards changing the taboos and eliminating shame around menstruation in our community, Dandora, where I grew up, which is an informal settlement. We provide sanitary towels to adolescent girls in community high schools and mentorship so that we can dispel myths and misconceptions around menstruation. We have provided this monthly to 300 girls since our inception in 2017 through the support of different partners and individuals. We also have involved the boys in schools we work with so that they understand the importance of ending period poverty and their important role in making menstruation an everyday occurrence and everyday conversation. Some even request pads for their sisters who need them. We just marked Menstrual Hygiene Day with 70 of the girls in our program. This was an important conversation to have, where the discussion brought about the names they give to their period. Some examples were the visitor, the burden, the curse, Mashiro, and so on. This is the same for their private parts, which they have pet names instead of their actual names. It only goes to show that it is easier to walk around the shame when we give something a pet name instead of its actual name. The girls never have discussions with adults in their lives, and this makes them vulnerable to a list of effects like transactional sex that lead to teen pregnancies, that lead to school dropouts. Violence comes into play, early marriages, and STIs, including HIV. So really my call to action today and to everyone in the meeting today is to make menstruation conversations an everyday occurrence. the power holders in our communities, which most of the time are men, should be leading these conversations. I never had even once these conversations in all my years of going to church, even in our teen after church sessions. This is a great avenue to have these conversations. Menstrual products should be of choice for women and girls. Each community and household is different, and it is important to allow girls and women, even in their lack of these essential products, to choose what they are comfortable in and not what we would like to give them or sounds hip and current. I, for one, have struggled so much with menstrual cup to the point of tears. And I wonder how this would work with girls who have never had sex or had babies. So this also goes for our reusable towels that the girls, when given, never use. As a challenge here is shame and limited water to use. So if you do not have water at home, or the limited water that you have is for other things to do within the house, and also you find that period is shameful for you, where will you put these pads for them to dry? And lastly, let us normalize these conversations in church and readily offer menstrual products in church as well. I would probably go to church if I knew I would get a pack of pads when I do not have. Providing menstrual products is not a one-off thing. It's not something nice to do. It's not something that you do as a way of showing you are aware of what is happening for girls. It should be consistent, even as a project, and to have meaningful conversations as well, as encourage the same in our homes and in our church groups. As one of our speakers have already mentioned, we all have a part to play to make menstruation an everyday normal fact of life. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for enumerating all the challenges that teenage girls face in not only in informal settlements, but pretty much everywhere, and how menstrual education, sex education is lacking, particularly in the church environment, and how the church never talks about it. Thank you for challenging as a young woman to the church, and there are several church leaders seated here around. I'm sure this is a message to many of us. Now, friends, we have finished the first segment of the problems and solutions, and I would request Nikki, my colleague, to now spend some time in question and answer sessions from the first set of speakers. Nikki.
Thank you, Dinesh. I know that for the most part, what we have are comments, and the main question that was asked was from Anita, was it? Who asked questions regarding cups and reusable pads and the challenges of cleaning and washing. How do we respond to this? And does any of you who have spoken previously have a response for that? Because in the absence of washing, how do we do proper disposal? So in 1 minute, I invite any of you to respond to that question, please. Sorry, it wasn't Anita, it was to Anita.
Yeah, actually, we have initiated this initiative in 2 states, in Rajasthan and in Maharashtra. And we have selected a group of women and young girls, and they have been taught to make their own pads with the use of the materials which they already have in their homes. And they have been asked, because we have seen we have done a need assessment, and we have seen that they were using cloths again and again repetitively, and sometimes there is very less water to wash it, and there is no place to dry it out under the sun. So we thought that let's do something which can be creative and not very toxic, or it should not have any chemical ingredient in the product. So we started with that, which is very economical with them, and now some of the girls, they have started using them. Though this challenge, I think, is still there, that this menstrual waste is something which needs to be addressed. not only in emergency, but also in the long-term development plans. Yeah.
I also have two comments, one from Metropolitan Seraphim: break taboos and stigma, raise awareness, mobilize funding, and this contributes to the overarching goal to build a world where no one is held back because they menstruate by 2030. The other comment I want to raise, I already lifted up what Anchor said. I wanted to note that, separate and apart from Nina's commendation of the sobering info from Puerto Rico, Moima Coker quotes, "In many countries, there's a lack of political will and investment towards women's health issues. For example, on menstrual hygiene, in many settings, there's no local manufacturing capacity for menstrual products, relying on imported and highly taxed products, poor sanitation facilities to accommodate and encourage menstruating girls to attend school. The totality of these factors continue to burden young girls and women with hampered opportunities for education and socioeconomic participation." And this is an excerpt from the Contextual Bible Studies on Health and Healing by Emma Coker and G. West editors. So with that, we know that there's also a valid point. Using our voices, this comes from Stephanie, is an awesome avenue to get people talking about hygiene in churches. When women in Kenya aren't allowed access to the altar during that time, and at the same time, when you try to get permission to speak, you get shut down. How do we, as people religious, transform those silences to be life-giving and enabling for all? I believe Lucy had some ideas, and I heard Roxana with some ideas. In less than a minute, can each of you just help us to think, how do we break the silence? And I think that would be a good usher into the two videos from our partners. Lucy and then Roxana.
Thank you, Nikki. So for me, I would think the best way to break the silence is to keep the conversations going. In whichever space that you are in and you're in leadership, it's a good opportunity for you to bring together people to speak. Like I'm saying, when I was going to church, I did not ever see an opportunity where we were coming together as young people to even have these discussions happening. And probably this was my only, this was my only safe space as a teen that would have created certain impact if I had the proper knowledge here. And if they're not coming to church, where can you get them in the spaces that you influence? So this could be in schools, the way we are doing as Positive Young Women Voices, going into schools. And you find that teachers are really receptive to this because they don't have opportunities for them to engage their young people in these schools. So there are opportunities all around us, even in our own homes. Are you having these discussions with the ones that you're in your home? Are you having these discussions with your mentees? It might look like something that's very common, but it's not. Even how to wash your panty is something that you might find with common, but it's not. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Roxana? Thank you so much, Lucy.
So what I was saying also in my presentation, what should be the response of the church, and what I think is that we have so many problematics. We have the blockade and some political issues that you must know. But what we're doing as church is how can we be supporting girls and women from the gender inequality, and how to help them to take care of their bodies and to keep a very well hygienic, menstrual hygienic, and to promote a good health in dignity. That's thank you.
Thank you so much. So in the face of a blockade, they encourage good bodily hygiene, and overall that should help to make a difference. So we're hearing from one of our participants, Esther, that they are experimenting with menstrual pants, which will last for 12 hours, and this would not cause a flow back. Elizabeth says that menstrual hygiene is serious and difficult to curb because of lack of water supply, which is something that Dinesh works on. And let's bring others into the conversation. And on that note, Dinesh, let us bring two very critical pieces into the conversation for everyone's consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you. This was very interesting to hear the voices from the participants. And so just another initiative from Ethiopia. We would now watch a 1-minute video from an Ethiopian organization supported by the Swiss Reformed Churches, HEX, how they are trying to promote menstrual hygiene among the children. So over to you, Walter.
Xurii laguu abaaboon biraa yoo nu dhuf mana barumsaa isa irraa harcaatiin waan jiruuf hin hafaa saalfataa ture. Deebinee dasee qulqulluu waan hin qabneef qulqulluu hin qabnetti fayyadamna. Moodesisanii fayyadamnee bakka gara MHM ruumiitti dhaqnee qaama keenya dhiqannee MHM ruumii dhaqnee jijjiiramne. Waan qoratamee dhufeef akkasitti hodhisiisaa itti ganaatti waan qoodamnee itti fayyadamu yennuuf qoratee waan dhufeef dasee badduu waan hin taane waan qoratamee dhufeeruuf. Isinillee galatooma baay'ee isin jaalladha.
So this was something very interesting initiative among the schools in lines of what Anita was mentioning and several others. And then Martin was mentioning about men talking about this. And there's a very popular Bollywood film from India that created huge ripples when it started a few years back in India. And let us hear look at a small clip from that movie called Padman. Like Batman, you have Padman, where normalizing the conversation around sanitary pads and how a man was kind of victimized or ostracized from a village just because he started caring about women having a dignified period. This is the societal challenge. So let us use this YouTube video, just 2 minutes trailer, Padman. Thank you very much. This movie is available on Netflix called Padman. I encourage you to please watch this. It's very, very informative. Friends, there were many questions also about religious background, how it is a religious taboo. And therefore now, from practical problems and solutions, we're coming to the religious perspective to listen to some of the aspects from Hinduism, Islam, and Christianity. So I would request now Walter to kindly play the next presentation from Sadhvi Bhagavati Saraswati, who is the General Secretary of Global Interfaith WASH Alliance. And she also has been the president of United Nations Faith Advisory Council on Religion. She's also a member of PARD, which is one of the co-organizers today. So Walter, we will now listen to Sadhvi's video. Thank you.
It's such an honor and a blessing and a joy to be together today in this truly August gathering, coming together for such a critical topic and at such a critical time. World Menstrual Health and Hygiene Day. The average woman, it said, spends about 7 years of her life menstruating. 7 years. Now you imagine, if you're a woman, imagine it with yourself, or imagine it with your wife or your daughter or your mother or your sister. If you're going to go somewhere, or they're going to go somewhere, for 2 weeks, for a month. How much time and energy we spend making sure that where we're going is beautiful, is safe, is healthy. Imagine when your daughter goes off to university, how much time and energy we spend making sure that those 3 or 4 or 5 years are safe, healthy, and conducive to her full and beautiful blossoming as a student and as a woman. We do that whether we're going on holiday for 2 weeks to a hotel or an Airbnb. We do it for college dorms, for hostels, for campuses. And yet, 7 years of our life that is spent menstruating, how little time and attention we give to ensuring that it's safe, that it's healthy, and that it is conducive to our blossoming as empowered, courageous, anchored, grounded women. Here in India, with all of the work that we are doing, it seems that there's 3 main areas we really need to work on to fulfill this beautiful goal of ensuring by 2030 that no woman is held back because she menstruates. Number 1 is access to education and information. Tragically, in India and many, many other countries, the average girl only finds out about menstruation when she starts menstruating. In India, that number is about 70%. They don't know what menstruation is, what's going to happen to them, why it's going to happen, until blood starts trickling down their leg and they're full of fear, shame. So access to education, access to information about what it is, but also about how to take care of themselves in a way that enables them to be healthy, but also to stay in school, also to stay in the workplace. In India, we lose a tragic 23 million girls a year who drop out of school when they start menstruating, simply because they don't have access to the education about how to take care of themselves properly, or they don't have access to supplies, or their schools don't have toilets where they can take care of themselves, or the toilets don't have doors. So we need to ensure that they have access to the education and the information, and then access to the actual supplies. In rural India, only about 20% of women actually use sanitary pads. In urban India, it goes up to just over 50%. But that means that almost half of the women, even in urban areas, are not able to go to school, to go to work, to be in society, because they need to stay home and bleed. In today's world, we have all of the innovation, we have all of the access, we have all of the supplies. So they need to have access to that, but ideally in an eco-friendly way, because otherwise all that happens is we create pollution on the ground. In India, about 22 billion maxi pads are dumped every year, 22 billion. So eco-friendly, sustainable solutions to menstrual hygiene. And lastly, access to real empowerment, not just biological education, but education that helps them understand that we menstruate because that power of the divine creator is in us. Where there is menstruation, there is creation. Where there is not menstruation, there cannot be creation. Prepubescent girls, postmenopausal women cannot create life. So menstruation is this symbol of the power to create life. It's not a monthly problem, not a monthly illness, not something to whisper as a taboo. It is something to be proud of, that the divine has given us the power of creation. And if we can bring this to our girls, to our women, we can reach that goal long before 2030. But together we need to come to end the taboos, to end the silence, and to bring the access and the empowerment. Thank you so much for the beautiful opportunity to be together and to share today.
Yeah, that was Sadhvi Saraswati giving a situation from India, but also she had sent something in written form about the perspective from Hinduism, which I put on the chat to save the time. And now we would listen to Islamic perspective on around the issue of menstruation. I would request my friend and colleague Shaheen Ashraf, the head of global advocacy for Islamic relief worldwide. She has over 25 years of experience in various sectors, faith, development, humanitarian aid, etc. And she's also one of the co-leads of PAD gender work stream. So over to you, Shaheen.
Thank you, Dinesh, and hello everyone, and thank you so much for your previous comments. So I will try not to repeat what everybody else has said, and I'll go on the line of what Sadhvi has said, basically. So part of my conversation today is we may never know how exactly menstrual taboos were established, and modern menstrual euphemisms that we see and the taboos that actually drive them are nearly ubiquitous. They take similar forms across many geographies and almost always reflect a long-standing view of menstruation as something that is polluted, something that is shameful, or something that is impure, and something that is dangerous. And the view of menstruation has sweepingly oppressive and deadly consequences, and everybody's mentioned this, with significant costs to our economies, to gender equity, and to reproductive health outcomes. Menstruation, coming from the gender working group at the Partnership for Religion and Development, I see is a form of misogyny. Negative taboos condition us to understand the menstrual function as something that needs to be hidden, something which is very shameful. And so here's a question. And by not naming a thing, we reinforce the idea that the thing should not be named. And therefore, we feel as though the thing should be named, whether it comes in the name of periods or menstruation, whatever it is. And so when we have periods or menstruation, do they always need these coded words? And where did these words come from? And how did they come about? Were periods always considered a negative experience? And my dear friends and my dear colleagues, you know, menstruation is a biological fact of life for billions of people around the world. Yet this misinformation, this denial of information, this stigma and discrimination can turn this very natural process into a needless physical, emotional, and economic hardship. Whether it's menstruation or menopause, talking about periods has often been a taboo subject. But while menstrual negative taboos are nearly universal, there are exceptions, and taboos themselves are variable. Certain societies operate with positive menstrual associations and euphemisms. Some modern day hunter-gatherer societies, for example, hold on the understanding of menstruation as being powerful, as being healing, as being protective and being sacred. And these groups are also more likely to have a degree of gender egalitarianism. You know, a young girl's journey through puberty is so often rocky and marked by fear and embarrassment, to say the least. The struggles of learning how to use menstrual pads and tampons or painful cramps, the bloating and the raging hormones are all ingrained in the memories of most of us girls and as women. All of that is compounded by the adults who tell us, shh, who shush their daughters, their nieces, their younger sisters, pestering them to keep quiet. Because periods make boys uncomfortable. Because periods are not meant to be a topic for open discussion, but a pain to be suffered in silence, even when they are still learning how to navigate. We really do need to stop period shaming. I've just come back from Afghanistan on Thursday. And for young girls who are displaced, who are vulnerable or living in an unstable home life as a refugee, the experience of growing into a woman and learning about one's body and come to terms with it in this practically non-existent space, is so much more difficult in humanitarian settings, and people have said it. The privacy can be scarce and sanitation facilities are often lacking. In refugee and displacement camps or other emergency settings, toilets and bathing facilities may be unsafe and often, and I've seen it, exposing women to sexual assault. So while the belief is that women are impure during their periods is a cultural one and not strictly a religious one, similar taboos surrounding menstruation exist among several other religious communities. Such attitudes towards menstruating girls and women in many spaces and faiths. But it's time to put an end to these harmful attitudes towards a natural human process to stop period on menstruation shaming. So in Islam, you have certain Islamic scholars, and this is somewhere where we can actually, from the faith perspective, come in. So you've got scholars interpret the principles of Islam in a way where they put forth extreme words. Like, for example, we are trying to look at the language narrative of how this has come about. They use extreme words like forbidden and prohibited when it concerns menstruation. So this very idea of banning something to say it is impure and that could penalize people is something that we're going back to. We're saying that there's a possibility that such interpretation is backed by patriarchal prejudices, which come with the reason behind women experiencing stigma in Muslim cultures around the world. From an Islamic perspective, menstruation is not a shame in Islam. In Kitab al-Hayd, which touches one major book which touches on menstruation, a whole book is dedicated to the rulings and the hadiths and the sayings of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And it contains specific verses that tell women that periods are meant and what they're meant for. You're excused from fasting, you're excused from praying, you're excused from reading the Quran. But what we have now is a generation of young girls who are now coming forward and saying, actually, on social media, that I can do this and I can do this and I will do this. And so we're clear about what menstruation means. It's clear that the way we talk about menstruation is slow to change because of how deeply menstrual taboos are ingrained in our cultures, in our beliefs and our histories. And it's clear that societies which give us our understanding of our bodies were formed around these taboos. And changing taboos requires the systems to change. But in order for systems to change, we need to name it and not be ashamed of it. So let's change the language that doesn't serve us. Thank you, Dinesh. Back over to you.
Thank you so much, Shaheen. I think it's important that in Islam, menstruation is not shamed, but its patriarchy is at the core. And it's interesting to see young women coming forward and breaking those taboos and stereotypes around this topic. Thank you so much. Friends, we have just finished our time. It's 5 o'clock. And I request you if we can allow 5-10 minutes more. We have just one more speaker to go. And so if you're okay for another 10 minutes, we would be very appreciative. And with that request, I now hand over the last speaker of the day, Reverend Nicole Ashwood. Nikki, over to you to give us the Christian perspective.
Thank you so very much, Dinesh, and thank you to my two sisters who spoke before. As we consider making menstruation normalized in our societies, let us consider the following in relation to shame, abuse, and restoration of dignity. It is important to note that issues of menstruation in Christianity are rooted in Levitical laws. And so in Leviticus 15, we are told, when a woman has a regular flow of blood, the impurity of her monthly period will last 7 days. Anyone who touches her will be unclean until the evening. Anything she lies on during her period will be unclean, and anything she sits on will be unclean. Is this an assumption of how long the woman's period lasts, 7 days? Or does this relate strictly to the flow of blood? Why then does this become a point of shame even today? Maybe it was about access to water or hygiene services rather than shame that resulted in the establishment of that Levitical law. But that does not explain the caveat in verse 32 that says you must keep Israelites separate from things that make them unclean, so they will not die in their uncleanness or defiling God's dwelling place. Could that also have been about ensuring that in restraining the women from having a natural flow, there would be healing issues being resulted? Who knows? I bring us then to the issue of abuse when women are removed from the society in order to keep them away from impurity affecting the rest of society. And in 2 Samuel 11, a woman becomes a victim of sexual violence when she goes to the ceremonial bath to restore her purity at the end of her cycle. 2 Samuel 11:4 says, David sent messengers to get Bathsheba. She came to him and he slept with her. No, she was purifying herself from her monthly uncleanness. In other words, David had Bathsheba taken to him immediately after seeing her during a ritual bath, which symbolized the end of her period. My sister earlier mentioned the whole process of life that comes out of the flow of blood. And we see, therefore, that Bathsheba was raped after her so-called period of uncleanness, but it also resulted in her becoming impregnated. In the name of protecting the community from impurity or waste of life, do we not see that in the name of religion, we also threaten the lives of females by keeping silence? The silence has to end. Until menstruation becomes normalized in our context, women remain at risk. When Bathsheba's rape is juxtaposed against the Levitical laws, one realizes that menstrual flow can lead, however, to new life. Yet, in Christian faith, shed blood is the basis for salvation. How then can we argue that the discharge of menstrual blood is a source of shame? Something doesn't add up. Finally, I bring us to one of the most celebrated nameless women in the synoptic gospels, the woman with the issue of blood. In all three versions of her story, in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, she was nameless and bleeding. In all three versions of her story, she pressed through the crowd to get her healing. In all three versions, she was ritually and therefore socially unclean. By touching Jesus, Jesus then becomes unclean. And everyone else with whom she interacted in pressing to Jesus, they also became unclean. This uncleanness was theirs, whether they realized it or not. But they wouldn't have known it if Jesus had not made her shame public by asking the question, who touched me? Jesus, whose blood was shed to effect our rebirth, made menstruation public 2,000 years ago. He placed it in the public arena. By his question, by allowing the woman to share her story, Jesus normalized an unspoken, whispered conversation. By naming this woman daughter, Jesus gave permission for her to be seen, to be restored to dignity, and for menstruation to once again become an actual normal part of life. And so should we. For it is only when we are willing to break cultural taboos that each of us can find healing and wholeness needed to protect women and girls from discrimination, abuse, and other forms of inequality. He did it, so can we. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nikki, for encouraging us to reread the scripture. You have highlighted several text references from the Bible, which helps us to take a positive affirmation towards this topic, which is always relegated to the corner as a taboo subject. And I was also looking at some of the comments that are coming, like preachers, pastors should use the pulpit to talk about it more often, and helping to interpret or rereading the scriptures. I think that is very, very important. And therefore, in the interest of time, I do not think we would have an opportunity for a question answer sessions because we have gone past the time. But there are several suggestions that have come up. Breaking the silence is important. And I think this is a good start that we at least started talking about it. This is one of the first time we have made an attempt to make a webinar and talk about this at WCC in a long time. I do not know in the past, but this is important that we start talking about it, and also look at various social, cultural, religious, and also practical issues around water sanitation that also may impact these issues. There were several good practices that were listed up there. There are vending machines in colleges that Golda from India mentioned, how girl students can get encouraged to take affordable sanitary pads, to several other very good practices that are talked about. So with these few words, I again give back to Nikki to have your closing remark in 1 minute, and that would be 5:10, and we have to end there.
Friends, menstruation cannot be a point of shame. We must end the taboos, period.
Okay, that is the punchline. And friends, taboos around menstruation must, or period must end, period, full stop there. So thank you so much for all your active participation, and all the speakers who gave your valuable time, all the participants who stayed along such a long time. And the recording of this conversation, this webinar will be shared with all of you. We will also publish it on the WCC website. Presentations will be shared with all of you. And thank you so much. Keep talking, keep breaking the silence around this taboo subject, so that menstruation becomes a normal fact of life, at least by 2030, if not sooner. Thank you so much. And I thank Walter, also our communication team, for helping us with the complex webinar with so many speakers. Thank you very much, everyone.